And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the latest installment of UnSpun, episode number 37. Today I'm joined by the lovely Dr. Kate Rhéaume Bleue. And excuse me, Joe is actually out tonight. He got a touch of food poisoning. Boy, I've got a scratchy throat all of a sudden. And I think Dr. Kate does too. Kate, you were on my show a couple of years ago on the Gnostic Media podcast. It's good to have you back. Good to see you.
Hey, good to be back. And you know what? We're still spreading the word about this important topic. There are so many new people that need to hear about it. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that and raising awareness.
Yeah, and your last interview on the show was quite popular, and I think it's still getting some traction on there. But
I do. I still hear from people who listen to that, and it's for sure spreading the word.
Excellent to hear. Well, we should probably inform the audience what you're here to talk about. We haven't discussed that yet. And I met you a couple of years ago in Pasadena. You're actually from Quebec, right?
Right, Montreal, yes.
Right. And you gave me a copy of your book there, so she even autographed it for me. And so her book is Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox. And it's a hugely important topic because it gets into the importance of fats and the importance of vitamin K2 and calcium and how it's regulated in the body. And she gets, deep into the cause and effect of heart disease and all kinds of good stuff. And so, Kate, would you like to start off by telling us a little bit about your educational background and how you got into investigating K2?
Sure. I was born and raised in Montreal, as we were saying, that's my home. And I thought I was going to follow in the footsteps of an older sister who's a medical doctor, went down that route. The more time I spent in, volunteering as a pre-med student in hospitals and whatnot, the more I felt like there was something missing for me. And long story short, I ended up pursuing naturopathic medicine. In Canada, naturopathic doctors are licensed primary care physicians. And that is my training, but I also developed a fascination, of course, with nutrition and sort of happened along kind of by chance of some studies in around 2005 about vitamin K2, which I had not heard of and still lots of people haven't heard of. And the research was so compelling and so fascinating and the health benefits seemed to be so important that it shocked me that we hadn't heard more about it. And I started to research, and the more I dug, the more I found and realized that it really is the missing piece to the puzzle of health for lots of different health conditions, common health conditions. And it also plays a really important role, a life-saving role, potentially, for people, for example, who are taking vitamin D, high-dose vitamin D, as well as calcium, definitely. And even though it's a nutrient that may seem obscure, you haven't heard about it, K2, it must be of little importance. Turns out that it's been overlooked, but it's of major importance to our health.
All right. So what is vitamin K2?
Vitamin K2 is a fat-soluble vitamin like vitamins D and A, but it works quite differently from those. It has several roles in the body. Its best known role is for essentially ushering calcium around the body, specifically helping to guide calcium into bones and teeth where we want that to be, and even more importantly, keeping calcium out of soft tissues like arteries. So the subtitle of my book is How a Little Known Vitamin Could Save Your Life, and that's not hyperbole. That is literally true. Vitamin K2 can help prevent and reverse arterial calcifications, which lead to heart attack and stroke, and prevent and reverse calcium buildup in other areas of the body like heart valves, other blood vessels, not just the coronary blood vessels, soft tissue all over the place, heel spurs, kidney stones, those kinds of things. That's its main role in the body. It has other roles as well. It plays a very important role in cancer prevention and protection, cell growth regulation, really important role for facial development in utero and after birth during childhood, even insulin resistance. We're really just scratching the surface. I would say vitamin K2 is about 20 years behind vitamin D in terms of our knowledge about it. and yet it is easily as important as vitamin D to our health.
Do you know who originally discovered vitamin K2?
Yeah, the researchers who discovered, well, the whole family of K vitamins, well, there's really only two members of the K family, K1 and K2. Henrik Dam, he was the researcher, the key researcher, excuse me, who discovered this back in the 1930s. The researchers won the Nobel Prize for this discovery, as a matter of fact. But they really were looking and focusing on vitamin K1. And this is a nutrient that, as most people are aware, comes from or is found in green leafy vegetables. Its major role is in blood clotting in the body. And it is so important to our blood clotting that deficiency is almost impossible. And at the time, researchers saw this other form. They said, it looks a little bit like K1, but it's sort of different, so we're going to call that K2. And they said, but you know what? It's a blood clotting vitamin. It's just about impossible to be deficient, so that's the end of the story. And that's why vitamin K2 was overlooked for about 70 years, because it doesn't participate in blood clotting under normal circumstances. We should talk about that. And it's not found in green leafy vegetables, and it's actually very easy to become deficient.
And that's one of the big things, because vitamin K1 is found in leafy green vegetables. Vegans and vegetarians especially assume that they are getting enough of it. And essentially the only source of the only vegetarian source is from beans or legumes, especially soybeans, which then have huge amounts of phytoestrogens and things like that, which can cause serious trouble. So, I mean, you can probably explain this a lot better than I can. So, you know.
Well, it was really this confusion between K1 and K2 that caused K2 to be overlooked for so long. And that confusion persists. And even scientists perpetuated that confusion because they noticed that, yes, when you eat green leafy vegetables, a tiny, tiny amount of the K1 from those is converted to K2 in your body. So we thought, well, because you convert a little bit, you must be getting enough. And that isn't true. You cannot achieve your vitamin K2 intake even by eating very large amounts of green leafies or taking large amounts of vitamin K1. That's been studied and shown not to happen. You need to get K2 in through preformed. Humans, we are not very good at making this conversion. Herbivores are animals that live exclusively on green grass and plants. They do make that conversion, but we as people don't. And so we have to look at the unique food sources, which we can go over. One type of fermented legume is high in that. And we have to do more testing as well to see which other foods are high.
All right. So what is the paradox between calcium and vitamin K2?
Calcium is a double-edged sword. We absolutely need calcium in our bodies, and we have it in our bodies in relatively high amounts just about all the time. We need that for our muscles to contract, for our heart to beat, for our nerve cells to fire. But calcium can end up in the wrong places. And when it does, it's dangerous and even deadly. And vitamin K2 solves that problem by keeping calcium in its place. Because we've always had high amounts of calcium, we've always had to deal with calcium, the body has a very sophisticated and very efficient system to deal with that, and keeping calcium in your bones and not in other areas. But the system requires vitamin K2 to work. And so if vitamin K2 is lacking, then you can potentially end up slowly losing bone density or slowly building up plaque in your arteries. These things can go on for decades before you have a problem, but it will be a problem, and it can be a problem that kills you. So vitamin D, for example, will help us absorb calcium. That's important. Once the calcium is absorbed, vitamin D has no control over where it goes. That's the role of vitamin K2, to take the calcium, put it into the right places, and take it out of the wrong places.
Let's talk about rotten jaws, etc. This happens with calcium supplements when when they're just taking in the calcium without K2, or what happens there?
That's right. So, you can see deterioration of the quality of the jawbone with a number of health conditions, in some cases just with age, infection, certain medications. For example, I had a case not too long ago of an individual who had a problem, an infection in one of his teeth. They had to pull his tooth, and he wanted to have a dental implant put in, but the dentist said he simply did not have enough bone in his jaw. His jaw bones were so porous that they couldn't put an implant in. He started to do some research. He found my book. He started taking vitamin K2. It was 5 months later that he went back to see the dentist and sent me the x-rays. The dentist said he'd never seen anything like it in his life, and he never expected a 65-year-old man to go from so little jawbone, so little bone in his jaw that they couldn't put an implant to, you could see on the x-rays it's white, the bone is hard and healthy and strong. And the fact is that our body has the capacity to heal at any age from all kinds of conditions we wouldn't have expected. We just need the right nutrients. We need to supply the body with the right nutrients to do that.
All right, and that would go for osteoporosis, et cetera, I would imagine, correct? Just all the way across the board.
Exactly. I mean, osteoporosis, there's always lots of factors involved with osteoporosis, including how much bone you built up before the age of 30. However, vitamin K2 has been shown to be a real important key. And for some people, it's, the missing piece, the key to their puzzle for their osteoporosis. That can be a tricky condition to treat.
All right. So what should we hit next? Because I know a lot of what we're going to say is going to make a lot of vegans and vegetarians unhappy. And that's why, I was a vegan vegetarian for many years. It wrecked my health, and I ended up in the ICU after years of that. And with bacteria going off, and as soon as I started eating meat and fat and cholesterol and all that stuff again, well, everything stopped. My health problems all reversed, and I've been stable now for about 4.5 years. And so, what is it that we're not getting enough of, especially those of us who were or are vegans and vegetarians?
Do the vegans even listen to your show, Jan? I'm wondering if they still do, but...
Well, I think we made a lot of them upset, didn't we?
The vegan listenership is down, I imagine. Actually, the very highest known food in vitamin K2 is a vegan food, plant-based food, fermented soy food that we can talk about natto. So that is very good news for vegans. Now, the soy issue aside,
in one aspect, but a very dangerous one in another aspect.
Right. Well, we should talk about that as well. We'll talk about the foods where you find vitamin K2, and I have people, using that to ferment, say, turtle beans, which is less problematic than soy. But I do, unfortunately, have had, more people than I'd like to admit discover my work and my book because they were vegans for a very long period of time, and I respect and admire the philosophy that goes behind that, and yet health tends to suffer over the long term, and people looking for answers and realizing they were missing this important nutrient, which is found primarily in animal foods, animal-based foods, and very few, the really only one known plant-based food.
And it's got to be fermented at that. And then, especially for us males, consuming soy can be especially bad because of the amount of phytoestrogens, but it can wreak havoc on women as well. That's
true. Now, natto, so this the highest known food for vitamin K2 that was natto, that's N-A-T-T-O, a Japanese fermented soy food. It is a traditional food and a common food in many areas of Japan. And whether it's due to the fact that it's fermented or other aspects of the diet, it doesn't seem to be problematic, and you don't have to eat it in very high amounts. However, I do know people who take that natto, culture the bacteria, and use that to culture, some supplements even are made from cultured chickpeas or black beans, and it's the bacteria that's making the vitamin K2, and you can avoid the soy altogether. And on the screen there, we see some natto there, and that's soybean natto, and it's basically, if you like to eat snot, that's what you get. hey, you got to watch out because the natto lovers will be all over you. Let me tell you, I get many an angry email from people saying I'm not positive enough about natto, and everybody's sending me their natto recipes. Please don't send me your recipes anymore. I just, I've come to the conclusion it's like cilantro. Probably you love it or hate it, but do try it.
I too received a lot of natto hate mail after the last interview. So, folks, just realize that even the FDA lists soybeans as a toxin, as a poison, like 240 plus times. And, soy is so widespread in our food. So many people have a terrible allergic reaction to it. My own mother, if she gets any soy products at all, she has an immediate reaction and starts having intestinal problems, etc. There are a lot of risks with eating soy. It's not a safe, a vegan safe haven.
Agreed. And so there are other foods. There aren't any other vegan foods that are even high or even contain vitamin K2 that we know of. Again, we've got to do more testing. But all the rest of the foods are animal-based foods. So vitamin K2 comes from two main sources, either grass-fed animal foods. You can find it in regular animals. So, for example, egg yolks, they will always have a smidgen. Even your regular store-bought egg yolks will always have a smidgen of vitamin K2 in it. But a grass-fed egg yolk with the hen actually out on the pasture, that'll have 4 to 5 times the amount of vitamin K2. So you'd have to eat about a dozen regular eggs a day to get any worthwhile intake of vitamin K2. Whereas at the right time of the year, a grass-fed egg yolk will, 2 of those, 2 eggs a day would give you a meaningful amount. So let's see, egg yolks, butter, the fat, it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so the fat of animals that eat grass, and some animals more than others. Goose seems to be higher for some reason. So that's one source, animal foods, but more so grass-fed. And then the other source is certain fermented foods. So some, but not all bacteria will make vitamin K2. So certain cheeses, certain fermented dairy foods are very high in K2. Brie and Gouda, very high. Cheddar, for example, has a little bit. Yogurt has none. The bacteria that make yogurt don't make K2. Other kefir or kefir has not been tested to my knowledge. It might be high. And there's other foods that as well might be high, and we do need to do more testing.
So somebody like me who typically eats 7 to 9 eggs a day, I'm probably getting a little bit of K2.
As long as they're, I'm sure they are, nice grass-fed eggs, then you are.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, at least they say free range on the box. Who knows,
Oh, well, that could mean anything. You got to check.
Yeah.
You got to almost look with your eyes.
You almost have to own a few dozen chickens. All right, so let's get into some of the health issues that arise from vitamin K2. We talked about osteoporosis. We touched on heart disease. Where does it go from there with vitamin K2 deficiency?
So yeah, osteoporosis is the biggest one. If you want to look at K2 deficiency in terms of a calcium problem, calcium lacking where it should be, that's osteoporosis is the main one there. There's also, you could argue that dental health, oral health. I think this is potentially one of the most important areas of K2 benefit that has been overlooked and underappreciated. Not really, the research hasn't caught up or followed up to some of the early historical evidence around this. But for example, we don't store vitamin K2. And this is one of the reasons why we need to get it in on a regular basis in our diet, or else you become deficient really quickly. And deficiency simply means that you have these problems, either calcium leaching out or building up, and can go on for a long time before you notice. But when your levels are sufficient, K2 will tend to accumulate in the saliva glands, and then it is squirted essentially onto the teeth, and that helps to keep the teeth clean. And so some people, when they up their K2 intake, will report that the plaque sort of crumbles off their teeth, if their teeth are cleaner or more slick, or their dental hygienist will make comments like, oh, you're flossing more, or something like that. So keeping the teeth clean and free of cavities. There is a more involved mechanism, more systemic mechanism actually, that has been propose as to why this works last year in medical hypothesis, that it actually has to do with the regulation of the circulation through the teeth, which is ultimately under endocrine regulation. And that's really fascinating. So K2 is a really important nutrient for oral health and dental health. And by the way, tooth sensitivity, you're sensitive to hot or cold, or you have to use that sensitive toothpaste, I'm pretty sure now is just K2, a sign of K2 deficiency. So if you've got sensitive teeth, try increasing your K2 intake. I've come to believe that that's all that is.
Is there is vitamin K1 deficiency common?
Almost impossible. K1 is essential for our blood clotting. And yes, I mentioned we find this in green leafy vegetables, but it's so important for our health. You can't afford to bleed to death because you haven't eaten a salad or broccoli. And so the body has a system of recycling vitamin K1, which is why deficiency is very, very rare. When it occurs, it's usually it's almost never due to lack of intake. It's usually due to a secondary problem like liver disease. And it's obvious. You will start to bleed or bruise or something that you will notice. So K1, you can more or less ignore it. It's easy to get in your diet. You don't need to buy it in a supplement. You can take it for granted. K2 is a very different story.
All right. So what about vitamin K3 through 7? Are they of any importance?
Not really. I mean, K3 is one, and some of the other ones that have been used therapeutically for cancer treatment, but actually, ironically, K3 is quite toxic, and K2 likely has all the benefits for cancer. And one of the largest bodies of evidence for vitamin K2 research is in cancer prevention and treatment. And you can get those benefits without the toxicity you associate with the vitamin K3. So I don't even usually, trouble people with K3 or more. Now, when we talk about vitamin K2, and I don't want to confuse people, but it is worthwhile knowing, there are different subtypes of vitamin K2. This only becomes important essentially when you're shopping for supplements, because you'll find two different types on the market. They both work. They both have the same benefits. They should be taken in slightly different doses, and we can get into that. But really, it's just K1 and K2. You can more or less ignore K1. So we want to focus on getting enough K2 in our diets.
All right. So what are these two different types of K2?
So vitamin K2 occurs in nature in a number of forms. Grass-fed animal foods, for example, have what's called a short chain form. It's called MK4. The 4 just designates the length of the molecule. Fermentation produces a number of different types of vitamin K2 that are longer chain, MK7, 8, 9, 10. 7 is what you'll find exclusively in natto. 8, 9, 10, you'll find this in a number of types of cheeses. You don't have to worry about figuring out which type of vitamin K2 you're getting. They're all the same. They all do the same thing. They just come from different food sources. Just get some K2.
And here we see that. I was just going to show, here's the MK4 and the MK7. So basically the chain is longer, and then we see K1 up on the top there.
Right, and that difference, that chain, I mean, I don't want to make anybody's eyes glaze over with the biochemistry, but the difference in that length of chain, it translates into a slight difference, it seems, in the fat solubility of the nutrient, which means the dose that you need to take and how long it will stay in the body. So basically, when you're going to shop for supplements, online or wherever, you will find either MK4 or MK7 supplements. They both work. There's research behind both types. You don't need both. You can take one or the other. There's a slight difference in them in that the MK4, because of that shorter tail, it seems to have a shorter half-life. It leaves the body quicker. So studies have typically used that 1 to 3 times a day, whereas the MK7 form is a longer tail. You can take that once a day. Technically, you could take it even once every other day. It just stays in the body a little bit longer. So the MK7 form, I lean towards that because it stays in the body a little bit longer, and the doses required to get benefit are slightly lower. But any form that you can get. Now, the MK4 form, for example, is soy-free as well. And so for people who are concerned about anything that may have come into contact with soy that they could use that form as well. You can find soy-free versions of the MK7 form, but those are also typically derived from the natto bacteria. So again, they both work. You just need to make sure you know what you're getting so you're getting the right dose.
So when you go to the store and you buy a bottle of vitamin K2, it's either going to be a soy-sourced type or a dairy or egg source type. Is that correct?
No, actually, and that's a really good question. So the MK4 supplements that you find on the market are not sourced from, say, animal foods. They don't culture up grass-fed butter or egg yolks and extract the MK4. That would be exorbitantly expensive. MK4 supplements that you find in the market are synthetic. They are made from a synthetic process. Regardless of your thoughts on synthetic, there's a lot of research behind them showing they're very safe and very effective and safe at extremely high doses. So I really don't have a concern around that. The MK7 supplements are typically made using the natto bacteria. Again, they're not culturing up natto and extracting the vitamin K2, but they basically get the natto bacteria in a laboratory, they feed them a little bit, and they'll make vitamin K2. But there may be trace amounts of soy in those products, and so if you're really concerned, you can look for soy-free MK7 supplements. They use that bacteria on chickpeas or some other legume. And there's other forms of purified soy-free MK7 products. You just have to look for that if that's a concern.
All
but
right.
I'm
So
concerned about the amounts of soy that you find in the supplements because it's trace if detectable at all.
all right. So what is activator X?
It's vitamin K2, as far as we know. One of the most interesting parts of this story, to me, was fascinating, was the history about this nutrient, that there was this whole body of evidence that was sort of hiding in plain sight, or, I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but when Weston Price, who was a dentist in the 1930s, was puzzled as to why so many people had such bad teeth and were sick in general. He traveled around the world and found healthy people living in remote areas and tried to figure out why they were healthy compared to North Americans that he was familiar with. And he found that these people ate, their diets were much higher in vitamins and minerals, 10 times higher in fat-soluble vitamins in particular. He noticed these people consume more vitamin A, more vitamin D, and more of a third fat-soluble vitamin that was not A or D, but he didn't know what it was. And so he just called it X, and ends up doing quite a bit of research on activator X, as he referred to it. And for a long time, there was a debate, mystery as to what that could possibly be. And it was really only in 2007, Chris Masterjohn made the link between activator X and vitamin K2. And this, to me, was sort of when I really got hooked on K2, in the sense of realizing there was just this long, fascinating history. And Price's work, I think we still haven't caught up with a lot of what he looked at. And that is a really interesting. You wouldn't think the history of a vitamin could be interesting. This one really is.
Well, I agree, and I think it's an important one, and it exposes and helps us to understand so many things on so many different levels regarding diet and nutrition. And myself ending up in the ICU after being a vegan, and discovering Bill Davis's work and getting off the wheat, and then discovering the high fat diet and starting to eat lots of eggs and butter and steak and things like that. And suddenly my health bounded back. And then you find out, K2 and these other things. And, sure enough, when I was a vegan, it was hell on my teeth, and
Yeah.
You think you're eating all these greens and things like that, and you're getting everything and everything's going to be fine. You go to the dentist, he's like, man, you got some cavities going on,
And cavities, we will see this with the vegans, but I think what is more concerning, and this is a heartbreaker, I can't tell you how many people have discovered my work and my book because their children have mouths full of cavities. And this is, it's traumatic for the parents. They feel terrible because they think somehow they failed their kids. It is not a matter of brushing and flossing. But the fact is, if mom was deficient in K2 during pregnancy, and or the kids aren't getting it in their diet as children, you can see terrible, terrible dental situations. And people are boggled. because they're brushing, they're flossing, they're not giving their kids, sugar water in bottles at nighttime, and yet their teeth are crumbling out of their mouth. An acquaintance of mine, somebody I just ran into, who said he just brought his daughter to the dentist because she's 5 and had 12 cavities. They had to pull 2 teeth. And this is just a vitamin K2 thing. It's not a hygiene. It's not brushing and flossing. It's not neglect on any level. It's vitamin K2 missing from the diet.
Now, has there been any evidence of people who increase their K2 levels actually having teeth regenerate and things like that? Have you heard of anything like that?
I've certainly seen jawbones regenerate, and I've had a couple people approach me that I haven't heard back about tooth regeneration or cavities filling in. This Price describes this time after time and actually publishes in his work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and excuse me, X-rays and radiographs of this. But I can't see, I've personally seen it in practice, although I've seen a lot of really interesting things.
I was just taking down some K2 here.
Nice.
All right. So what's the deal? Why is K2 lacking in our diets today?
2 major things. Decrease in, grass-fed animal food. So when we took animals off the pasture and combined them to grain feeding, we took the grass out of their diet, then our K2 intake took a big hit. Ironically, it was actually the discovery of vitamins A and D. Once those were discovered and they realized they could supplement animals with those and allow them to come off the pasture, then this is when the large, grain feeding operations stopped. But they didn't know about K2. Animals can get by without that for their short lives, artificially short lives. And the result is that we're lacking that in the animal foods that we would have once had. And the other thing is the refrigerator has not been our friend in this department. The concept of eating fresh food that has been, kept in a fridge really is not something we would have done traditionally. We would have eaten a lot more fermented foods, and that would have been the main way of preserving our food. And those fermented foods, many of them would have been providing a lot more amounts of vitamin K2 than the fresh foods that we're eating. So those are the 2 main. There's other factors. The invention of trans fats, margarine, that will disrupt your intake or your body's ability to process vitamin K2 in particular, and that's been a problem. But the grass-fed foods and less fermented foods is the big issue.
A few years ago, Texas A&M published a study saying ground beef from grass-fed and grain cattle doesn't matter. And then they go on to expose that there's really no nutritional advantage to eating grass-fed. Is this true?
That's so misguided. And I can imagine who's behind that kind of research, but absolutely.
In this case, Dr. Stephen B. Smith. And of course, they want to promote lots of GMO-fed yucky stuff, but go ahead. And,
there have been just many studies showing that grass-fed beef in particular is higher in the omega-3s. The ratio of the healthy fats, omega-3s to omega-6, is much healthier, higher in just about every nutrient that you can think of. Vitamin K2 is one that typically is not measured, and they're usually looking at the meat. You wouldn't find this so much in the meat as the fat, but any nutrient that you can think of is going to be more or less higher in the grass-fed version.
Yeah, and they're saying oleic acid and monosaturated fatty acids are, and I haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly, but are apparently the same. And it says ground beef from grass-fed cattle that contains approximately 10 to 15% total fat, 85 to 90% lean, is available in retail stores. So the values listed below for a 4-ounce ground beef patty, quarter pounder, that contains 85% or 15% fat, and goes on. The most abundant omega-3 fatty acid is linolenic acid, ALA, etc. Anyway, it's going on with all of this stuff, but they're claiming that they're showing in this one that omega-3 is higher or it is higher in grass-fed. They show 0.055 grams to 0.020, and then they show more oleic acid in grain-fed and higher saturated fats in grass-fed. And they're trying to claim, I guess, trans fat from beef. I thought trans fats was mostly vegetable oils. I could be wrong on that.
There are naturally occurring trans fats that you'll find in ground beef, CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which is a really good thing. You want that to be higher, and so hopefully it was higher in the grass-fed.
So it's not the stuff from the what is it? Not homogenized, the like margarine and Crisco.
Yeah, right.
Hydrogenated.
Thank you. Yeah, it's not. As you know what, trans fats have a bad rap, and the man-made trans fats are definitely really bad for you. But as with everything, there's actually good trans fats and bad trans fats. It's a real small category, but there are naturally occurring. CLA is a naturally occurring trans fat that you'll find in ground beef. People are taking supplements of this to try to get it in higher levels for weight loss. It's definitely a healthy fat, but it is also a trans fat.
Yeah, talk about that, and that seems a contradiction to a lot of people. Of course, Dr. Mary Enig, working with Sally Fallon, published Eat Fat, Lose Weight. So what's the story with that? And of course it's true, but, it's contradictory to what most people are told because, why would you eat fat to lose fat? But what most people don't realize is all of that inflammation and the weight gain that you get and all of that stuff is created mostly by grains and a high sugar diet, et cetera. So then the body is keeping on water to try and fight this immune response or reaction to this that continues on for months. So if you cut the grains out and you go high fat, suddenly the weight disappears, the body's stable, weight stabilizes. You're going to look like you probably should have when you were 22 or whatever. What do you have to say about all of that good stuff?
Amen to that. I mean, it is absolutely true. That has been.
I try to tell people all the time, eat more bacon, butter, eggs, and steak, and they just look at me like I'm cross-eyed.
Yeah, I tell people to eat brie cheese and red wine, and they shake my hand and they giggle. We all break open the brie and the wine. It's all true. I mean, fat was unfairly demonized, villainized. If anybody's interested in the why or the how, good calories, bad calories by Gary Tobes kind of goes through the whole history of how that got to be, when in fact there was just never any good evidence behind it. Fat is satisfying. We are innately satiated by eating it. It keeps us feeling full longer. And when you eat it, it will not raise your insulin levels, which is the big problem. Eating carbs, sugars, and this makes your insulin go up and all the problems.
Whole grain bread, that was my thing.
That's right. Whole grain bread will get your insulin up even more than white bread.
More than white bread, and wreck your teeth and cause all kinds of problems and wreck your stomach as well. Sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah. Oh no, that's exactly it. And this has been touted as supposed to be, the foundation of our diet, and it's just a recipe for all. That's how we fatten our cattle, right? By feeding them lots of grain. It's a good way to fatten cattle. It's a good way to fatten people.
And I'm sure you've made the connection. So they tell everybody to eat a low-fat, low-cholesterol diet. Everybody gets obese, gets sick. They tell them to eat lots of oatmeal and lots of whole grains, and all of a sudden you have this massive explosion in diabetes, obesity. The diseases from the grains manifest in 30 plus different forms. So you go to the doctor and he thinks the one with eczema is different from the one with psoriasis, is different from the one with schizophrenia, is different from the one with IBS, is different from the one with heart disease. Mm-hmm. And they're basically the same root cause. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about that. And you really can't even see what's going on with somebody's health more or less until you eliminate those foods, because they're so problematic on so many levels.
Right. So, people ask me how many eggs I eat, and I'll say, usually like 7 to 9 eggs a day. And they look at me like I'm cross-eyed. Aren't you worried you're going to have a heart attack? And it's like, well, I'm 50 pounds lighter than you. You know, and I gained 50 pounds from when I got out of the hospital in Peru after getting off all the grains and going to a high-fat diet. So I weighed 114 when I was released from the hospital in Arequipa, and now I weigh about 164. So, you know, I actually gained a full 50 pounds.
Wow, that's incredible. You know, and not to mention, those eggs contain choline, which will feed your brain better than, you know, almost anything else. It's so critical for the functioning, production of acetylcholine, that the functioning of our brain and cognitive health.
Now, to give Dave Asprey credit for, you know, the bulletproof coffee, you know, that's been a huge thing to me too, because I notice, you know, my body, I can recognize now when I'm feeling deficient in fat, and it's just becoming acclimated with the ketogenic diet, and your body will tell you. And you know, and before, instead of going and snacking on crackers or junk food or some whole grain bread or some, you know, vegan soy thing or whatever, you know, you have some butter, some eggs or whatever. It satisfies your hunger. And not only that, but it gives you energy for about, on average for me, is about 4 to 6 hours. You know, so if I have 5, 6, 7 eggs for breakfast, it'll, you know, at 7 o'clock in the morning, it'll hold me easily until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon without any snacking whatsoever.
Yeah, with the high carb diet, you're almost always chasing your hunger, and you never really feel so satisfied or frequently thinking about food. And then when you turn to fat as your fuel, it is more deeply satisfying. You will go for 5, 6 hours without thinking of food. It's not uncommon.
You know, and for a lot of people, the vegan diet essentially becomes a grain diet, and then this is going to dramatically increase the health problems. And then what they'll do is they'll try to source vegetable fats to compensate instead of just eating a healthy diet. And then they're importing coconut oil from Asia and avocados from Mexico or California, and and this and that. But why not, instead of appealing to emotion, why not just look at the facts and say, you know what? If I just source my food locally, and if I were to eat healthily, looking at what I would need to get, food within, say, a 50-mile radius of my house, what would I do? And is it getting coconut oil from Asia to compensate for these, for the lack of fats? And then again, it's not going to have the vitamin K2. It's not going to have, maybe it has some amounts of cholesterol, but your brain is made of cholesterol. Your reproductive system is made of cholesterol. And that's another thing, is people who are having trouble conceiving a child, look at that whole issue. Increase your egg and butter and steak intake, and probably in about 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 3 months, you'll conceive.
Actually, vitamin K2 has been shown to increase testosterone levels and sperm count. So for sure, we know for men, there's a direct correlation on that.
I can directly attest that is absolutely true.
Yeah.
So
women, that it's more complicated, but we know for men.
Right. Well, and all over the radio these days, you hear all of these commercials. Is your testosterone count low? You need to take this pill. No, you don't. You need to go eat some eggs. Maybe there's a reason why they call them huevos or something. Excuse the pun, All right. Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, before we move on, or it leaves my mind, you just in passing mentioned psoriasis before. And this is something I want to bring up because it's not something I wrote about in my book, but it has come up since then. Some really astonishing cases of people who have healed themselves of psoriasis using vitamin K2. One woman I can think of who was suffering with psoriasis very badly for 47 years, had a terrible outbreak. Long story short, she discovered a vitamin K2, and her skin has been completely clear for the last 3 years, to the point that she's devoted a website, freedomfrompsoriasis.com. You can check that out. She's not selling anything. She's just literally telling her story of using vitamin K2 to help her skin, and it's a good one.
Well, I know someone who was a vegan for about 8 years and had many years of psoriasis issues and helped her get off of the vegetarian diet, start eating steak and, a normal balanced diet, and lots of eggs and butter and bulletproof coffee and all of this stuff. And it took a while. It took, I would say, maybe a year and a half to 2 years, but after, the 2 to 3 year point, there was a dramatic turnaround, and I would say by that point, it was about 90% cleared up. So I've seen that too. Of course, that's anecdotal, and you're a doctor. We're not supposed to be speaking anecdotally.
Yeah, but you know what? People are out there treating themselves, helping themselves, and then emailing in with their results. And, that's important evidence too.
It is. It absolutely is. And of course, anecdotal evidence can be a very good map to what is going on there. And, in the 19 shows now, including yours and everything, Kate, I have to say, with all of the people, between Sally Fallon and Bill Davis and everybody who cut the grains out and went high fat and, started upping their cholesterol and everything, I've probably received over the last several years over 1,000, maybe 1,500 emails just on this one topic. And I personally have not had one single person say that it impacted them negatively, and all of them said that they had dramatic health turnarounds, insomnia disappearing. We've mentioned so many other things, but I had one guy on my show, Mike, a couple years ago, and he had MS. He was walking with a cane. He had a 3-year-old boy. He couldn't run or anything, walked with a cane, and he got off the grains, went high fat. He came on my show at about, I think, the 6-month point, and he was off the cane, able to walk, starting to run and jog a little bit, able to play with his son and stuff, which he hadn't been able to do. He was pretty much bedridden for several years.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, things that we might have considered incurable or, that would naturally progress and you wouldn't see an improvement, they've been astonishing. Aortic stenosis, for example, buildup of calcium on the heart valve that typically is considered to be irreversible, leading to eventually a heart valve replacement, open heart surgery. I've had a handful of cases now. I published one of them in my book, but a handful of cases of people who said, the cardiologist, they've done the echo, the heart valve is now clear, free of calcium again. So the body has an amazing capacity to heal from all kinds of things. And we just need to let it do it, feed it the right food to let it do that.
Now, why don't we get in a little bit to explain to the audience the difference between LDL and HDL cholesterol, and what's happening in the arteries, what's going on there that's causing the heart disease? Because most people hear cholesterol, they go, it's bad. They think that right. They've been told from the TV and their doctor that the cause of this bad cholesterol is their steak, butter, and eggs and bacon, etc. And so people rush away from that, and then they go exactly to what is the real problem and what really causes the heart disease. So why don't you break this down for the audience?
So there's 3 things. First of all, inflammation will happen in the body. That inflammation is usually due to what you're eating, and typically, the trans fats and the carbs, the sugar, the foods that make a lot of insulin will make a lot of inflammation in the body. And once your body's exposed to this inflammation for long enough, the arteries start suffering for it. They start becoming diseased. There can be typically a lack of antioxidants, a lot of free radical damage happening here. And if there's not enough antioxidants to help with that, that is also contributing. And when the arteries become diseased, they essentially start sending out the cure to their own problem. They'll start sending out these little proteins. One of them is called MGP. And that protein will actually clear up, heal the inflammation, and heal. Ultimately, what will happen is the arteries will start to calcify. There's plaque deposit and it's calcify. But if vitamin K2 is there, it will activate that little protein, and that will scour calcium out of the system. So really, when you have inflammation, a lack of antioxidants, which, by the way, keeps your cholesterol from turning bad. We call LDL the bad cholesterol. It's really only bad when it becomes oxidized. So, and that's when it becomes prone to sticking around these inflamed arteries. So,
isn't it like gelling together with the calcium without vitamin K2? Isn't there a synergistic effect there that causes the heart disease?
Exactly. So lack of vitamin K2 and this oxidized cholesterol, which is caused by a lack of antioxidants. So that's your three components. There's inflammation, there's a lack of antioxidants, so your cholesterol is becoming oxidized, and a lack of vitamin K2. And those three things, it's very common, will lead to this problem of plaque buildup, calcification in the arteries. K2 on its own has been shown to prevent and reverse that calcification, but even better if you can get an anti-inflammatory antioxidant, something like curcumin, for example, does both of those things really well, will turn your bad cholesterol back into good cholesterol. And again, it's only bad when it becomes oxidized. LDL, I don't even worry too much about cholesterol. Don't take the medications. We should probably talk about why. But and get the inflammation down, and you can prevent and reverse heart disease.
Well, and let's go right into that. So you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Kate, you need to take statin drugs. Here's some Lipitor." What's the truth about all of this?
Long story short, and we can get into the details of why that's not helpful. But long story short, statins are not good at what's called primary prevention. In other words, if you have never had a heart attack, taking a statin drug will not change your risk of having a first heart attack. If you've had a heart attack, depending on your health history, there's some evidence to suggest that taking statins may reduce your risk of having a second heart attack. But I think for the majority of people listening who haven't had a heart attack, there's no reason to take a statin because it will not change or lower your risk of having a heart attack. So that's really the bottom line when it comes to statins. And, we could get into the details about how it's really addressing. Cholesterol goes up because of this inflammation. Cholesterol is an anti-inflammatory compound. Cholesterol is going up to soothe that inflammation.
Right. So you need to solve what causes the inflammation rather than band-aiding the inflammation itself. So in 2010, my stepfather goes into Loma Linda University Medical Center, which is a big famous heart hospital here in Southern California. And he has a triple bypass, and they clean everything out, and then he goes home. He goes back to the doctor a few weeks after the surgery, and every 2 weeks he's having a checkup, and they're like, hey, you're starting to clog up again. You need to change what you're doing. You need to eat more oatmeal, more whole grain bread, this kind of thing. So right about the same time they told him that was when I met Dr. Bill Davis, who, of course, is the famous author of the Wheat Belly book. Of course, I had him on before he got famous for that book, but he was famous before then. But so he sends me a couple copies of his book, and I tell him about my stepdad's situation. So he sends me an autographed copy for my stepdad for Christmas. So I give him the book for Christmas. He reads it, cuts all the grains out of his diet, goes back to steak and lamb and butter and eggs, goes back to the doctor the next month, and everything was reversed. And no joke, the doctor says, "What did you do?" And he said, "I stopped listening to you."
Well, I had somebody recently who, they didn't make much of a major transformation to their diet as I would typically like to see, but, quick case of an individual who, a 63-year-old male, he said, all of his mother, father, and pretty much everybody on both sides died of their heart attacks in their early 60s. He started doing some research, discovered my book, actually, he was eating natto. He did it Japanese style, regardless of your feelings on it. He started eating natto every day. At about 60, I think 61, 62, his family doctor said, okay, you know what, given your family history, you better go get your heart checked out, go get a scan, sends him to the cardiologist. The cardiologist sends him for the heart scan, the calcium scan, which is now what is being used to measure the calcium in the arteries, and this will tell you your risk of heart attack very, very accurately. He said he went for the test, and the cardiologist did the test, and he wrote 0 on the test. And then underneath, he wrote ZERO and underlined it. And he said to the radiologist said to him, "You tell your cardiologist this isn't an accident. You have no calcium in your arteries," we've never seen this before. We don't know why, but you're completely free of calcium. In other words, you're not going to die of a heart attack, on this watch. So again, do we have a baseline scan? No. Was there any other reason that a man with this in North America with this extensive family history of heart disease would have absolutely no calcium in his arteries at 63? I can't think of why. So really, really, like, you can see so many amazing things in a short period of time. It doesn't take long. Like you said, as little as a month, a few months.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. What are what key, most important things should we fit into the interview here?
We haven't really talked about vitamin D much yet. And
Sure.
If you are taking vitamin D, you absolutely need to be taking vitamin K2 or increasing K2 in your diet. And lots of people, everybody's taking vitamin D. And as I said before, vitamin D will help you absorb calcium, but once it's absorbed, it has no control where the calcium goes. And the reason why I mention this is because there are some books and some experts that recommend extremely high amounts of vitamin D. And what that will do is just cause you to absorb more and more and more calcium. That calcium's got to go somewhere. Without vitamin K2, it will end up in the wrong places. And I hear from people who have had this problem. So please, if you're taking vitamin D at any dose, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, because it is really, it does a lot of amazing things for us and very difficult to get from the sun and from our diets, D and K2 have to go together.
So either eat lots of eggs and butter and things every morning with your D supplements, or, I guess you can get D out of the eggs and butter and everything too, can't you?
A little, but this will vary, depending on the time of year, depending on the pasture, the rate of growth. It actually gets a little bit complicated. D is tough. You get a smidgen in those foods. You get more in seafoods, sardines, herring, things like that, a little bit more, excuse me, in those things, but it's hard to get from food.
Yeah, you and I both on the right
yeah.
throat. All right, so let's see. We've talked about a lot of the health benefits of K2. Are there any health benefits that we've left out so far?
Yeah, very important prenatally. And so during pregnancy plays a very important role for the development of the fetus in terms of the bones and the teeth, the facial structure. That is both prenatally as well as throughout childhood. Vitamin K2 important for cavity prevention, for stronger, healthier skeleton, and a nice wide face. Avoiding braces, for example, would be a very practical way to take vitamin K2 for children. At adolescence, it becomes very important when the hormones kick in and the skeleton starts to grow. The body's demand for vitamin K2 goes up. It's a high time for the most deficient group tends to be adolescents. And then what else? Anywhere calcium's building up that it shouldn't be, heel spurs, kidney stones, breast tissue calcification, K2 is worth considering. And cancer prevention, protection, especially prostate enlargement, prostate cancer, quite a bit of research on K2 and prostate health, really important nutrient for men, prostate and heart health, and lung cancer. These are major health issues for men. So those are probably some areas that we sort of haven't touched on, but are extremely important.
Yeah, and there was just another point that I wanted to raise, but I think we're getting pretty short on time here. Kate, your website.
It is www.drkatend.com.
And of course, they're going to want to check out your wonderful book, which I have right here, Calcium Paradox, Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, excuse me. And all right, so we have about a minute and some seconds left. Is there anything that we should throw in? What do you say? Is there any safe wheat out there, in your opinion?
I hear of people, I hear that the wheat is quite different in Europe. There's lots of people you've probably heard who can't touch wheat like myself here in North America, and yet they can go on vacation in Italy and Europe, and they seem to be able to eat a lot of it without problem. So, the glyphosate, the Roundup has been implicated as being a more complicating factor. I think to be on the safe side, there probably really isn't very much safe. Even if it's safe, it still has a major glycemic impact. It's still making you produce tons of insulin. We kind of underestimate the amount of insulin our body has to pump out, regardless of, if it's wheat or even rice or whatever. That is a high glycemic load and does challenge us.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay off the grains, eat your eggs and butter, and if you can stomach it and want lots of phytoestrogen, your soy natto. She winces when I say that. Thank you so much, Dr. Kate. I really appreciate your time again. It's been great having you back. It's such an important topic, and we really need to get this very important information out to folks. So thanks for being back.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it. Always nice chatting with you.
Likewise. Take care. Have a good night.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.